Today, there are more than 8 billion of us scattered across the planet. We live in shining cities, farm fertile fields, and send machines into the stars. It feels as though humanity has always been strong, always destined to grow. But this picture hides a truth buried in our past. Long before skyscrapers, long before writing or firelight stories, our entire lineage came terrifyingly close to vanishing forever. Imagine a world nearly 1 million years ago. There were no modern humans yet, only our early ancestors, creatures who walked upright, who shaped simple tools, who lived by following rivers and hunting small animals. They were fragile, scattered, and unaware that nature was about to test them in the harshest way imaginable. From billions today, to barely more than 1,000 then. And yet, from that tiny thread of survival, we are here tonight. If you're new here, subscribe and let me know where you are listening from. London, New York, or somewhere else. I always check the comments. Close your eyes and think of silence. Not the silence of your bedroom at night, but the silence of deep time, of vast, empty plains where the wind carries no voices because almost no humans remain. This silence is the echo of a near ending, when our ancestors dwindled to a number smaller than the people in a village today. Scientists discovered this hidden chapter only in 2023, when they traced our DNA back through time. What they found was astonishing. A sudden collapse, a bottleneck, when almost every branch of our family tree snapped away. For more than 100,000 years, those who remained walked on the edge of extinction, each birth and death shaping whether we would continue or disappear. Picture a thin rope, stretched almost to breaking. That rope is humanity's story 900,000 years ago. The chance that it would snap was overwhelming. Our ancestors had no kingdoms, no walls, no protection but each other. Groups of 20 or 30 clung to life, following shrinking water holes, carrying fire, hoping each season would be kinder than the last. And yet, against the weight of climate and chance, the rope did not break. It bent, it frayed, but it held. 1,000 souls kept the spark alive when nature seemed determined to extinguish it. Their survival was not guaranteed. In fact, it was almost impossible. But sometimes, impossibility is exactly what happens. How did they endure? How did such a small number of fragile beings keep walking forward year after year through drought and cold when almost every other path led to extinction? That is the mystery we are about to explore together. This story is not only about death and loss, it is also about resilience, about how cooperation, intelligence, and chance created a doorway through which we eventually stepped into the modern world. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, we will follow their footsteps through deserts, ice, and fire, to understand how close we came to never existing at all. For a long time, researchers wondered why humans carry so little genetic diversity compared to other primates. Chimpanzees, living in small scattered groups, hold far more variation than all people alive today. Something was missing in the human story. The answer finally emerged in 2023, when advanced methods traced the DNA of thousands of individuals back through deep time. The result was shocking. Around 900,000 years ago, the genetic signal collapsed. It was as if an entire forest of branches had been cut away, leaving only a fragile twig. Our early ancestors, likely Homo erectus or Homo heidelbergensis, dropped to fewer than 1,300 breeding individuals. Not tribes across continents, but a single village's worth of life. For more than 100,000 years, humanity's entire future balanced on that narrow thread, unseen until the evidence was written in our blood. Biologists call this moment a bottleneck, when a population shrinks so drastically that survival becomes nearly impossible. Most species that fall so low do not recover. Numbers below 1,000 create what scientists describe as an extinction vortex. Inbreeding rises, harmful mutations accumulate, and chance events like droughts or disease can erase the last survivors. For nearly 117,000 years, our ancestors existed within that dangerous zone, and yet they did not vanish. 1,000 scattered lives held on through bitter cold, failing harvests, and the loss of entire landscapes. Each family group was like a single flickering flame, fragile but determined to keep burning. Their survival was not expected. It defied the rules of probability, as if chance itself bent to allow them through. We are here tonight because they refused to let the last sparks of humanity die. For centuries, nobody knew this collapse had happened. Fossils from that era are rare, creating a gap in the record that puzzled scientists. But the answers were locked in DNA, carried silently by every person alive today. The genetic patterns showed not just that our ancestors were few, but that they stayed few for a staggering length of time. Over 100,000 years of near extinction. This revelation changed how we see ourselves. Humanity was not born in a steady climb toward progress. It was born in fragility, in survival against impossible odds. Every step of our story since then carries the mark of that narrow escape. We are not only the builders of cities and makers of machines. We are the descendants of survivors who once walked the edge of silence and somehow chose to endure. "900,000 years ago, Earth's heartbeat changed. Before this time, ice ages came and went with a steady rhythm. Every 41,000 years, the planet cooled, glaciers grew, and then the world warmed again. Tough for early humans, but predictable. Then, suddenly, the rhythm broke. The cycle stretched to 100,000 years, and they grew far harsher. Ice sheets became massive, swallowing continents, locking up oceans, and lowering sea levels by hundreds of feet. In Africa, where our ancestors lived, this change was devastating. Rivers dried, woodlands turned to grassland, and grasslands into desert. The land that had once offered food and shelter became a graveyard of silence. For those who depended on animals and plants for survival, the world became less forgiving with each passing generation. This was no temporary drought, no fleeting disaster. It was the beginning of an age-long trial, a climate trap that few species escaped. As the ice thickened far to the north, the skies above Africa changed. Monsoon rains, once steady, became weak and erratic. What had been fertile woodland shriveled into dry scrubland. Grass gave way to endless sand. Scientists call this process aridification, when a land not only grows drier but collapses into extremes. The great herds of antelope, elephants, and other animals that had thrived for millions of years vanished. And when they disappeared, predators starved, scavengers starved. And finally, the humans who depended on them were forced to adapt or die. For our ancestors, this meant living in a land that seemed to turn against them. Streams that once flowed year-round became shallow trickles, and then only dusty scars on the earth. Families who once followed game across green plains now faced a desert horizon stretching endlessly ahead. To survive, they needed more than strength. They needed ingenuity, cooperation, and luck. In this hostile landscape, the seeds of human resilience were sown. The climate trap was merciless. When great sheets of ice dominated the north, Africa suffered in the opposite way. Without regular rains, food chains collapsed. The few remaining water sources became dangerous battlegrounds, where predators and humans alike gathered in desperation. Entire groups of our ancestors vanished without a trace. What remained was a handful of survivors scattered across fragile pockets of land where life was still possible. Scientists believe these refugees may have existed near reliable lakes or rivers that never fully dried. Here, our ancestors clung to survival, though they had no way of knowing that most of their kind had already been erased. It was a perfect storm for extinction, drought, famine, and relentless cold in other regions. And yet this storm shaped us. Those who endured learned to adapt in ways no species had before. The crucible of climate would not only test them, it would transform them. When the climate turned harsh, most groups of our ancestors vanished. But not all. A small number survived in fragile bands scattered across Africa. These groups were tiny, perhaps 20 or 30 people each, linked by family ties and necessity. Everyone was related. Everyone depended on each other. They moved constantly, chasing water that dried too quickly and game that grew scarce. Survival was not about conquest or growth. It was about endurance. Daily life was brutal. The search for water came first, always. Families learned to read the land with almost supernatural skill, finding hidden springs or digging for moisture in dry riverbeds. Food was harder. Large animals were gone, so they turned to insects, roots, and small creatures. Nothing was wasted. Each discovery, an edible plant, a safe source of water, was shared, for if one person held back, the whole group might perish. These were not people of comfort, but of resilience. Among the most powerful tools of survival was fire. It was not only warmth, but protection from predators and a way to stretch the day beyond sunset. Around the flames, families could work on tools, prepare food, and pass on knowledge to their children. Cooking meat killed parasites, while roasting roots made them edible. Without fire, many foods would have been impossible to digest. With fire, survival gained a fragile advantage. But fire was more than practical. It was social. It was the heart of the group, the place where trust was built and memories were shared. In those long nights, when predators circled in the dark and the world seemed unforgiving, the glow of flames created the first circles of community. Here, language and teaching began to grow, and the knowledge of survival flowed from one generation to the next. Fire was not just survival, it was the birth of culture. In a world where numbers were so few, conflict was not an option. Every life mattered. A single death weakened the group, and too many losses meant extinction. This forced cooperation at a level unmatched by other animals. Disputes had to be settled quickly, resources shared, and the sick or injured cared for rather than abandoned. Knowledge was treated as treasure, passed down carefully so nothing would be lost. Through this, early humans honed a new kind of intelligence, not just tool-making or hunting skills, but social intelligence. They learned to read each other's intentions, to trust, to cooperate, and to teach. These skills would become the foundation of our species. In the crucible of desperation, community was not optional. It was life itself. And because of it, the spark of humanity endured when it should have gone dark. Fire was more than light in the dark. It was the difference between life and death. For our ancestors, mastering flame turned dangerous landscapes into places where survival was possible. Cooking food transformed root and meats into nourishment the body could use more easily. Flames kept predators away, pushing back the fear of unseen eyes glowing in the night. With fire, a day no longer ended with sunset. It stretched into precious hours of warmth and work. The discovery of fire was not sudden. It may have started with lightning strikes or volcanic embers carried carefully across miles. What mattered was that small groups learned not just to find flame, but to protect it, feed it, and share it. In this way, fire became more than a tool. It became a guardian, a presence always at the center of their fragile camps. To lose fire was to fall back into darkness. To keep it was to survive. Firelight did more than protect and feed. It created a space where community grew. Around the flames, voices carried softly into the night. Parents taught children where to find water, how to recognize safe plants, and how to track animals. Elders shared memories, passing knowledge that could mean the difference between survival and extinction. For the first time, information stretched beyond a single lifetime, becoming the thread that linked generations. This was also the birthplace of imagination. Shadows danced on stone walls, and in the flicker of light, stories took shape. Fire became the stage where myths were born, and where early humans discovered that knowledge, once shared, could outlive the body. In this way, the fire was not only warmth and safety, it was the first library, the first classroom, the first temple. Through thousands of nights, fire shaped more than survival. It shaped identity. It was the center of every camp, the marker of every gathering. Without fire, there was no safety, no shared meal, no gathering place. With it, there was a circle of belonging, a place where even in the harshest world, warmth and connection could be found. Fire gave rise to the first rituals, the first sense of us against the wilderness. It is no wonder that across cultures, even today, fire is sacred. It is the symbol of life, spirit, and endurance. For our ancestors, those flames were not only practical, They were a miracle they kept alive night after night. And so, humanity itself became firekeepers, guardians of a light that still burns in every home, every hearth, every candle. The fire they protected was not just heat. It was the beginning of being human. When populations shrink to the edge of extinction, evolution speeds up. Every birth and every death shapes the future more sharply. For our ancestors, the bottleneck was not just a struggle to survive, it was a crucible where their bodies and minds were remade. Traits that allowed endurance, adaptation, and cooperation spread quickly, while weaknesses faded with the generations. It was natural selection at its most unforgiving. This pressure may explain why, unlike many species that collapse and disappear, our line survived. In small groups, each advantage mattered. A keener memory, a stronger immune system, a sharper ability to recognize danger. These qualities became essential. The bottleneck stripped humanity down to its most resilient core, forcing survival to rest on the slimmest of chances. Out of that pressure, something new began to take shape. One of the great puzzles of human evolution is why we carry 46 chromosomes, while our closest relatives, chimpanzees, carry 48. The answer lies in a fusion event, when two chromosomes in our ancestors merged into one. Some scientists believe this may have happened during or just after the bottleneck, when evolutionary pressure was strongest. Though the fusion itself was random, it may have provided stability or advantages that helped our fragile species endure. This event is written in our DNA today, a permanent reminder that we are not simply a continuation of the past, but a reshaped lineage. In the crucible of near extinction, even our very chromosomes tell a story of change. While no one can say for certain how much this fusion mattered, it remains one of the signatures of how profoundly the bottleneck altered us. Survival under pressure required more than physical change. It demanded intelligence. In a world of scarce resources, early humans who could solve problems cooperate, and innovate had the best chance of passing on their genes. Perhaps this was when the first sparks of complex thought began to grow, thoughts that reached beyond the present moment, into planning, teaching, and dreaming. This intelligence was not yet the art or science of later humans, but it was the seed of both. In the fragile gatherings around fire, minds learned not only to adapt, but to imagine. And once imagination enters the story, humanity is never the same. The bottleneck tested our ancestors with extinction, but it also carved the path that led toward us. Out of the narrowest survival came the widest horizon. The bottleneck was not a brief crisis. It lasted more than 100,000 years, a stretch of time so vast it is almost impossible to imagine. Entire generations were born and died, never knowing that they lived through humanity's narrowest passage. Survival was not about growth or expansion. It was about hanging on, step by step, year by year. In this long trial, every mistake could mean extinction. Drought, disease, or conflict could erase entire bands of people. Yet, through the centuries, scattered groups continued, like faint embers refusing to go out. They adapted, shifted, and found ways to endure. Their existence was fragile, but it was enough. For more than 100 millennia, they played the longest survival game in history, and somehow they won. Scientists describe our ancestors at this time as a metapopulation, not one united group, but a web of tiny communities spread across hostile landscapes. Some groups vanished, erased by hunger or chance. Others endured, replacing those lost and keeping the chain unbroken. Together, these fragments formed a living network, fragile yet resilient. This network meant that even if one group perished, the story continued elsewhere. Knowledge traveled slowly, carried by wandering individuals or neighboring families. Survival was not about a single hero, but about the persistence of many small circles of life, connected by thin threads of memory and skill. Humanity survived not through strength, but through cooperation and continuity, even when most of the world fell silent. During these long centuries, our ancestors became experts at surviving in unpredictable environments. They learned to exploit every possible food source: roots, insects, small game, and occasional larger animals when luck struck. They adapted to shifting climates, moving between oases, highlands, and coastal regions. Their tools, though simple, reflected innovation: sharpened stones, early spears, and perhaps even containers to carry water. More importantly, they adapted socially. They relied on bonds of trust, on shared knowledge, and on teaching that passed wisdom from one generation to the next. This social resilience became their greatest strength. The bottleneck could have erased them, but instead it carved a lineage defined by flexibility and cooperation. In learning to adapt, they earned the right to continue the story that would, in time, become our own. After more than 100,000 years of drought and struggle, the world began to change. Around 813,000 years ago, the heavy grip of climate eased. Glaciers retreated, monsoon rains strengthened, and the parched African landscapes stirred with life once more. Where deserts had stretched endlessly, grasses returned. Rivers flowed again, filling lakes that had been only dust and memory. For the first time in countless generations, survival did not feel impossible. For our ancestors, this shift was like a miracle. Scarcity gave way to opportunity. The return of water meant more plants, more animals, and more secure food. Families who had clung to survival through famine could now grow in number. Instead of shrinking, groups expanded. And the long silence of near extinction slowly gave way to the sound of new life. Humanity had been tested, and now it was offered a second chance. With rains returning, the fragile ember of humanity grew brighter. Small groups that had once hovered near extinction could now thrive. Populations expanded, spreading into new territories and re-establishing a stronger presence on the land. The world was still dangerous, but it was no longer hostile at every turn. This growth also brought innovation. Stone tools became more refined, shaped with skill instead of chance. Hunting grew more organized, with groups working together to bring down larger prey. Cooperation, already essential for survival, now became a powerful advantage. The same resilience that had carried them through famine now fueled progress. From hardship emerged the beginnings of mastery over the environment. For the descendants of the bottleneck, the return of the rains was more than survival. It was rebirth. The earth itself seemed to open its arms again, offering food, water, and stability. Where once there had been only fear of vanishing, there was now a future. Slowly, our ancestors grew from fragile sparks into steady flames, spreading across landscapes that had nearly erased them. This second dawn marked a turning point. Humanity was no longer just enduring. It was beginning to grow, to expand, to prepare unknowingly for the greater chapters yet to come. The story of survival was transforming into the story of becoming. From the shadow of near extinction, a new horizon stretched before them, green, fertile, and alive with possibility. With survival secured and numbers slowly growing, our ancestors began to spread out across new landscapes. As groups moved apart, separated by mountains, rivers, and vast distances, they faced different challenges. Over time, these challenges shaped them in unique ways. Evolution no longer worked on a single lineage, but began to carve several. Out of the survivors of the bottleneck, 3 great branches would eventually emerge. One of these branches was Homo sapiens, our own lineage. Another became the Neanderthals, adapted to cold European plains and forests. A third grew into the Denisovans, mysterious people of Asia whose traces remain mostly in our DNA rather than in fossils. Humanity was no longer one fragile thread, but 3, weaving together a wider tapestry of survival. The Neanderthals became masters of survival in the frozen north. Stocky and powerful, they built shelters, hunted large animals, and crafted tools suited for a harsh world of ice and cold. Their cousins, the Denisovans, thrived farther east. Though little remains of their bones, their genetic echoes tell us they lived in high mountains and adapted to thin air, passing on those traits to modern people who dwell in similar places today. These branches of humanity were not failures. They endured for hundreds of thousands of years, proving that intelligence and adaptation were not unique to Homo sapiens. For a long time, the world was shared by many kinds of humans, each carrying forward the legacy of survival born in the bottleneck. Our story is not one of solitary triumph. It is one of shared endurance across many paths. Among these 3 branches, one would eventually carry the story forward to the present. Homo sapiens emerged in Africa, shaped by diversity of environments and challenges. Unlike their cousins, they developed lighter bodies, greater endurance for long-distance travel, and, most importantly, increasingly complex minds, social bonds, imagination, and creativity became their greatest tools. But at this stage, Homo sapiens were not yet dominant. They were only one of several human kinds sharing the world. Their survival was not guaranteed, nor was their triumph inevitable. What set them apart was still forming, the growing capacity to adapt not only with tools, but with ideas. This ability, born of ancient struggle, would eventually turn the fragile survivors of the bottleneck into the shapers of history. For tens of thousands of years, Homo sapiens were not alone. As they expanded from Africa, they encountered other humans who had also survived the bottleneck. Neanderthals in Europe and Western Asia, and Denisovans farther east. These meetings were not only confrontations, they were also connections. Archaeological evidence suggests that at times they competed, at times they cooperated, and at times they shared life itself. Bones and tools show overlapping territories. And ancient DNA reveals something even deeper. Our ancestors and these cousins interbred. Today, every person outside Africa carries small fragments of Neanderthal DNA, while people in Asia and Oceania carry traces of Denisovans as well. These encounters were not fleeting. They left marks that still live within us, silent reminders of a shared human past. Over time, the balance shifted. Neanderthals, once the masters of Europe's cold landscapes, dwindled. The Denisovans, whose presence stretched across Asia, vanished almost without trace. By around 40,000 years ago, only Homo sapiens remained widespread. Why did our cousins disappear while we endured? The answers are still debated. Climate change, competition for resources, and perhaps the greater adaptability of Homo sapiens all played a part. Yet their end was not total erasure. They live on in our DNA, in traits that help us survive in certain climates, in immune system defenses, and in echoes we cannot see. Their disappearance was not the end of their story. It was a merging with ours, woven invisibly into the fabric of every person alive today. By the time history as we know it began, humanity walked the earth alone. Yet we were never entirely separate from those who came before. The Neanderthals and Denisovans are not distant strangers. They are family, their struggles, their survival. And their final chapters are written within us. Every breath we take carries a fragment of their legacy. When we look at ourselves today, we see only Homo sapiens. But hidden in our blood are the whispers of cousins who once stood beside us, hunted with us, and shared fires with us. We are not just the children of one branch, but of many, descendants of a family that nearly vanished, but in the end endured together. Every person alive today carries within them the memory of survival. It is not written in words or stories, but in the code of our DNA. When scientists trace that code backward, they find the signal of the bottleneck, a time when the human family was reduced to fewer than 1,300 individuals. Against all odds, those fragile survivors endured. Their victory was not grand or glorious. It was quiet, fragile, and almost invisible. Yet it was enough to keep the line unbroken. We are the descendants of those who refused to vanish. Their struggles, their choices, and their fragile lives are the foundation of everything that came after. When you breathe, when you think, when you dream, you are continuing a story that should have ended. Our existence is proof that survival itself can be the greatest legacy. But survival came at a price. The genetic bottleneck left us with low diversity compared to other species. This makes us more vulnerable to certain diseases, more alike than we might imagine. Chimpanzees across Africa are more genetically varied than all humans combined. The narrowness of our past still shapes us today, in ways both visible and hidden. And yet, this very narrowness may also explain our strength. With fewer differences, humanity learned to cooperate, to build bonds across groups, and to see itself as one family. In a strange way, fragility gave rise to unity. The cost of survival became the seed of connection, binding us closer than we often realize. When you look into the mirror, you are not only seeing yourself, you are seeing the result of countless generations who walked the edge of extinction. You are the heir of their resilience, their endurance, their fragile victories. And so is everyone else. Every stranger you pass, every face in the crowd shares the same roots. We are all cousins, bound by a history far deeper than nations or names. This truth can change how we see each other. Division is shallow when compared to the vast unity written in our blood. Beneath the surface, we are one family that once numbered barely more than a village. And from that tiny seed, the human story grew into billions. Remembering this may be the most important lesson the bottleneck leaves us. Tonight, we walked through a story older than memory, older than history. We traced the fragile footsteps of our ancestors, who carried the spark of humanity when it was close to vanishing. From fewer than 1,300 lives, a world of billions has risen. Yet numbers alone do not tell the story. What matters is that they endured when all signs pointed to silence. Their resilience is the foundation on which every dream, every city, every life now stands. When we look back, we do not see heroes in shining armor or rulers of great kingdoms. We see families huddled around fires, children learning to survive, and scattered bands who refused to give in. Their victory was not loud. It was quiet, fragile, and patient. And because of it, we are here. The bottleneck teaches us something vital. Survival is not always about strength. Sometimes it is about cooperation, about trust, and about keeping hope alive when the world seems empty. Our ancestors were not the strongest hunters, nor the masters of their time. They were fragile beings, like us, who discovered that together they could endure what alone they could not. This is why their story still matters. It reminds us that humanity's greatest strength is not in weapons or power, but in community, in imagination, and in the quiet refusal to surrender. That truth, carved in the firelight of ancient nights, still echoes in the choices we make today. Every time we share knowledge, every time we teach, every time we imagine a future, we are continuing the work they began. The story of the bottleneck is not just a tale of survival. It is a reminder that even the smallest spark can grow into a flame bright enough to light the world. We are the living echo of those survivors. Their endurance flows in our blood, their choices live in our minds, and their dreams unfold in our future. So, as you drift into sleep tonight, remember, you are here because fragile lives, nearly lost, held on through the longest of nights. Their echo is in you, in me, in all of us. And because of them, the human story continues.